I'm Harold Holzer, and we're so happy to welcome back Dr. Lomezo to give us a new look he maintains was the true state of Franklin Roosevelt's health. He is uniquely qualified to do so. He's a widely respected veteran practicing neurologist, and he has studied Roosevelt's health and medical issues for decades. And this is an important subject. Why do we care? First, because we care about FDR in this house, as does Steve. Second, it allows us to examine and re-examine FDR's legacy, his late in the presidency decisions, atomic bomb development, most famously the Yalta agreements, through the filter of his declining health and strength. And because in a year when our two major presidential candidates are together 158 years old, we could actually get 3 average presidential candidates out of 150 years. By the way, Cornel West is 71, RFK Jr. is 70 with a worm, right? So this is an important, I joke about it, but this is an important issue. So here to conduct the physical and historical examination, he will talk to us and then take your questions before we surge upstairs to seize a copy of the book. Here is our good friend and generous patron. Welcome back, Dr. Stephen Lomezo.
Yes, RFK does have a worm in his brain. I want to thank Harold and Deb Gardner in particular for being my champions for this talk. This is the consummate. This is after 20 years of research. This is it for me. This is one of the greatest nights of my life, and I'm going to show you why. Because there's history through my lens, which is as a physician, which nobody has ever explored before. So let's just begin with this photo, which is taken a few yards from here. Let me figure out the laser pointer here. So took a while to figure out how they did it, because you'll see later that if FDR wasn't leaning on something, he would fall flat on his face. So I've never seen a photo like this. He's got his hand in his pocket. Obviously, he's gripping the railing behind but I've never seen a photo of this type where he and Eleanor are standing in front of the house. You'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. No, forward. Okay. Let's begin with his death certificate. As you can see, that it's in April '45. It's signed by Howard G. Brune on the bottom. Howard Gerald Brune, cardiologist, and the diagnoses given for his death were cerebral hemorrhage, which is undoubtedly true, and the only associated cause was hardening of the arteries, arteriosclerosis, nothing else. And that never really changed. Now, for a 63-year-old man who's a 2-pack-a-day Camel smoker and eats a fatty diet, it's not surprising he has hardening of the arteries. But you'll notice about the duration of this, 2 hours and 2.5 hours. He was stricken at 110, he died at 2:35, and 3:20, well, there's a time difference, but he died 2.5 hours later. And according to Dr. Brune, it was totally unexpected. It was a bolt out of the blue. I'm looking at my friend in the audience, Jan Herman. Jan is the former medical historian of the Navy who gave me my start in all of this. He came here from Maryland to be with me tonight, and you'll hear a lot about Jan's interview with Howard Brune coming up. Other people all my friends and family are here, but I wanted to mention a few people especially. Dr. Toby Raper, Hal Toby Raper, and his wife are here from Atlanta, Georgia. Toby is probably the world's expert in the field about Warm Springs. He was there when FDR's funeral train pulled out. His father was the doctor there. So Toby is a wonderful person. Jan is here. All my friends and family are here. I want to thank my wife for helping me with all of this and keeping me going, because May 16th has been the challenge of my life, and I'm here. I use FDR as my example. If FDR could get to Yalta, I could get to Roosevelt House. So, that's the death certificate. Now, FDR's life was a mystery. He reveled in mystery. He loved to be mysterious. Nobody knew anything about it. This is Time magazine 8 years after he had been inaugurated. And the bottom line is, who is Franklin Roosevelt? Nobody knew the guy. He had an inner circle of people who knew him, but nobody else knew him. As Robert Sherwood said, he had a well-forested interior. And this is the only article that I've ever seen which mentions the dark mole over his left eyebrow, which we will talk about in some detail. So, again, FDR had complete control of the information coming out of his inner circle. He had airtight control of the press. In his lifetime, there was never a photo of him in wheelchair, never a photo of him in a compromising position, never a political cartoon of him in a compromising position, verboten. So nothing was known about this guy. Even after he died, nobody knew anything. So let's talk about one particular instance which should drop your jaw. 25 years after FDR died, his daughter Anna had been getting all kinds of overtures from historians. I want an interview with you. I want an interview with the doctor. And she would tell him, no. Me and Dr. Bruen are going to be writing a medical paper. And in that paper, you can read it. And that paper was scheduled to come out in April of 1970, at the 25th anniversary of FDR's death. So Anna was saying, no. And then James McGregor Burns called. Jim Burns was a professor at Williams College. I had the privilege of speaking to him in his later years. I think everybody would consider this definitive FDR on the right. That's today. So that's if you go on Amazon, you see the definitive FDR. Jim Burns had just written his first book called The Lion and the Fox. That is considered the definitive biography and was at the time of FDR up until 1940. But then he wanted to figure out what the last 5 years were all about, so he calls Anna, and Anna says, sure, we'll fill you in. And he was writing this book called Soldier of Freedom. And he was going to schedule the book to come out at exactly the time that the paper was coming out. So it would be the paper and the book, and they would feed off of each other. Unfortunately, his publisher couldn't make that date. So he sends a letter to Anna, and he says, I want to do something at the time the paper is released, so I'm going to write an article. I'm going to write an article for a magazine. And he does. Whoops. Here we go. So he writes an article for the Saturday Review, dated April 1940. And in it he writes, Bruen's disclosures, which are as full and authoritative as anything we are likely to have on the matter, will force us to revise most interpretations of the significance of FDR's medical condition during his final year. The problem was that what they were feeding him wasn't the truth, because nobody could corroborate it. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's start with the article. It says on the cover, the young cardiologist, in other words, this rookie is coming in, and for the first time, his legs are shaking. He goes to see FDR, and he, out of the clear blue sky in April of 1945, March of 1945, he diagnoses congestive heart failure that nobody had suspected before. Well, let's start with the word young. Howard Bruen graduated Columbia Medical School in 1925. And then he went to the greatest medical school in the country, Johns Hopkins, and graduated in 1929. Then he went back to Columbia, and he became a full professor of medicine at Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons. He was one of the leading clinical cardiologists in the world. But the story was, this rookie is coming in and diagnosed a congestive heart failure for the first time. Ain't true. So this is what I call this is the paper, what I call the gospel according to Bruen. And I also say it's about the Halsteads because Anna was married to Jim Halstead at the time, who was a very good Columbia internist, and the three of them hatched this paper. Of course, Anna wanted to stay in the background, but she got permission from her brothers to do it. And this is the paper ostensibly by Howard Bruin, but quite frankly, most of it, a good portion of it, was written by Jim Halstead, and they reviewed it and they edited it. This is all in the Howard Bruin files at the FDR Library, if you just look at it. And even the editorial was written by Anna or Jim Halstead. We are given by Dr. Bruin the picture of a great and gallant man fatigued by the burdens of his hypertension and reduced cardiac reserve, yet quite able to exercise his judgment and to use the fruits of his unique knowledge. That's the story. It ain't true. So let's go down this bullet point by bullet point. So here's the false narrative that they created. Other than polio in 1921, sinus infections, hemorrhoids, and occasional bouts of the flu, he had no serious medical problems and was first seen by Bruin on March 27, 1944. Actually, the records at the library suggest it was the 28th and not the 27th. No way. Who unexpectedly diagnosed severe congestive heart failure. Number one. Ain't true. We know it. Bruin was recruited into the military in 1942 by Ross McIntyre to be FDR's cardiologist. I talk to Jan about this all the time. He enlisted, they put him in a boot camp to do physical exams to get him used to the military. And then they transferred him in April or May of 1943 to be chief of cardiology at Bethesda Naval Hospital, the Navy's hospital. And he says to Jan, I have no idea, no idea how I got from a boot camp to be the chief of cardiology. I went back and I looked and I couldn't find anything to say why they made me the chief of cardiology. This is all part of the show. Okay. The second one, FDR never cared about nor asked his doctors about his health. Now, this sounds kind of silly if you look at it, but that was the story. The man who spent 2/3 of his income in buying Warm Springs was one of the leading rehabilitative practitioners, he wasn't a physician, of the 20th century, basically founding hydrotherapy, and founds a charity which is to this day is the only charity that cured the disease for which it was founded, the Knights of Dimes. So, oh no, FDR never cared about his health. The line was, oh, he had a job to do. Bruin said, oh no, he never asked me. I would see him every day. He never asked me anything about my health, my blood pressure, nothing. He was doing his job, and I was taking care of his medicine. 3, FDR's medical records disappeared shortly after his death. Of course they disappeared because they had the truth in it. So of course if you disappear the medical records, anything we say can't be fact-checked, correct? Well, in fact, we know that the records existed because 2 very good medical historians, Ken Crispell and Carlos Gomez, were writing a book in the 80s about illness in the White House. So they sent a FOIA document, a FOIA request to Bethesda. And they get back a letter from the chief legal officer. Oh yes, President Roosevelt was here 29 times between 1940 and 1945, and these are the aliases that he used. Okay, so much for the lost medical records. Number 4, and this is particularly a thorn in my side. Ross McIntyre, and by proxy, the United States Navy, delivered grossly substandard medical care. Of course, the story here is that Anna didn't think he was getting good medical care, so she went to McIntyre and demanded that she get a second opinion, and that second opinion was Howard Bruin. It's all baloney. Ross McIntyre, one of the strategies for this whole thing was throwing Ross McIntyre under the bus. He did it himself. Because during his lifetime, he would say, oh, everybody's watching FDR wither away. Oh, he's fine. He's proud of his flat tummy. He's on a self-enforced diet. Ross McIntyre was not the bumbling ENT physician who sprayed stuff up FDR's nose as he's been portrayed. He was a leading practitioner in the field of head, eyes, ears, nose, and throat. He was not only an ENT doctor, he was an ophthalmologist. He's removing cataracts from people in the 20s. He was in World War I, did military service in the Navy in World War I. He joins the first dedicated hospital ship, USS Hope, and he's the surgeon on the USS Hope. And then he becomes an instructor in ENT, but also in ophthalmology at the Naval Medical School. So they recruited him because he was the best at what he did, not because he was some bumbling ENT, because FDR had sinusitis. This little canard, by the way, was hatched by Anna to Bernard Asbell in 1967 in the book Father and Daughter, and this is where it all came from. Oh, I didn't really think McIntyre was much of a physician. So she tells that to Bernard Asbell. Of course, Brune doubled down to Jan in 1990. Oh, it was all Anna. She asked me to come in because she wasn't happy with her father's medical care. The next, of course, is that he never had any cognitive problems or cancer. The cancer, well, we'll talk about the C word in a minute. Okay. So the paper can be controverted paragraph by paragraph. Let's just start with one and we'll move on. Unequivocally, paragraph 2, I first saw President Roosevelt professionally in March 1944. In 1946, his duration of service was not a secret. In fact, Ross McIntyre was writing a memoir, a whitewash memoir, and he wanted some information from Howard Brune to put in the book. So he writes to Brune, and Brune writes back, "It was my good fortune to be with the president for almost 2 years before he died." So it wasn't 1 year, it was 2 years. We have the history and physical and EKG performed by Howard Brune on Eleanor Roosevelt at Bethesda Naval Hospital in May 1943. Goes without saying. He was the president's doctor. He was recruited to be the president's doctor. Whoops. Let's get this moving here. Okay, let's talk about Ross. I think I spent most of the time talking about Ross. This whole baloney about, oh, the president's physician has to tell the truth despite what the president has. Ross was a naval officer, a career naval officer. He's treating his commander-in-chief. If he asked him to shoot somebody, he would do it. He did what he could to protect. People knew afterwards what it was. Let's let Harry Truman do the talking. It is one of the great satisfactions of being in this office that I occupy, that there are people who put the welfare of the nation above their own personal interests. That's President Truman, who made a point of coming to give a speech in 1951 about when they were honoring Ross McIntyre. So where did Ross come from? This is another jaunt through history. His mentor was Cary Grayson. Cary Grayson, you might recall, was Woodrow Wilson's physician. And his fiancée at the time was a woman by the name of Alice Gertrude Gordon. And he and Alice and FDR and Lucy Mercer used to socialize with each other because we have letters back and forth which kind of say so. Not totally 100% perfect, but good letters. In the Roosevelt world, you have to take hints. Nothing comes out unless, right? It doesn't slap you in the face. You got to figure it out. So, as it turns out, his fiancée was the best friend with a woman who had inherited a jewelry store from her husband by the name of Edith Gall. And as we say in Yiddish, they made a shidduch. Wilson was lovesick. His first wife, Ellen Axon, died just after almost immediately at the outset of World War I. She died of what was then called Bright's disease. Today that's called malignant hypertension with chronic renal failure. And he needed somebody. So they make the match. And they introduce Edith to Woodrow, and love ensues. And Cary Grayson is the best man at the wedding. Literally the best man at the wedding. Now, I'm a neurologist. This is my wheelhouse here. I've seen the original papers on this one. Woodrow Wilson has a devastating stroke. In October of 1919, it literally wipes out the right side of his brain. He's cognitively impaired. He can't see to the left. He doesn't even know he's sick. He's so sick. That's true. It's a neurologic syndrome. He had classic non-dominant hemisphere stroke. I've seen hundreds of them. And Edith goes to Grayson, and they hatch this plot that Edith is going to do all the signing, and she'll be the guy that takes care of everything. Got to come to her first. She's the gatekeeper, kind of like Missy was for FDR. And so for 18 months, Edith Wilson is the first female president of the United States, with the help of Carrie Grayson. So again, you can find things with hints. Okay, nothing hits you in the face. So when Grayson's papers came out about 15 years ago, and we're at the Woodrow Wilson's boyhood home at Stanton, Virginia, I made a beeline down there and went through the records with a fine-tooth comb. And what did I find? Well, I went through the condolence file, because Grayson had died in 1938 of lymphoma after being treated at the Mayo Clinic, and incidentally resting for a month at Hopcourt Barony before he had his surgery. This is what you find out when you look at this stuff. So this is a condolence letter. Remember her name, Alice Gertrude Gordon. They called her Gertrude. Dear little Gertrude of the long ago. And then she writes this lovely letter on Aiken, South Carolina, stationery. And who is it? Lucy Rutherford. Lucy married Winthrop Rutherford in 21. He was much older than she was. They had one child together, Barbara, who died in 1905. FDR called her his godchild. And she raised his 6 children. She's buried in Jersey at Winthrop Rutherford summer estate. I've been to the grave. So, all right. I got to go quickly on this stuff. So what did FDR have and what did he not have? First of all, there's a group of doctors, not even doctors, the medical statisticians, who are insisting that FDR did not have polio and he had Guillain-Barré syndrome. Ain't true. 100% false. There hasn't been a single person in medical history who wound up in a wheelchair after having Guillain-Barré syndrome. Let's talk about polio. Polio is a virus that attacks the central nervous system. It attacks what's called the motor neuron cells. Now imagine your body is a tree, and you cut off some of the roots, and then you can watch the branches of the tree wither and lose their leaves for the roots that you've cut, right? And that's what polio does to people. And that's what it did to FDR. And this is what it did to FDR. This is 1924. On the left is his first visit to Warm Springs. It's a wonderfully staged photo. The one on the right. And the middle are his braces. I took this picture at Warm Springs. He had no muscles below the waist, none. He couldn't flex his knees. He couldn't extend his knees. He couldn't lift his ankle. He couldn't stand on his toes. Nothing. In order for him to stand up for his entire life, he had to have these braces on, which are spring-loaded at the knees. So if he's sitting in some place and he wants to get up, he has to lock the braces at his hips, and be pulled to a standing position. That's the only way FDR could stand. Now, when polio is affecting you, it causes contractures of muscles. You can't control about how this works. So what happened with FDR, for 3 months at least, his muscles had contracted even with the best physical therapy. I had 2 of them upstairs who were taking care of him. And even with the best physical therapy, his legs are like this. He's standing on his toes. Well, the first step to recovery is walking with crutches. But you can't walk with crutches if you can't stand on the flat feet. So here's what they did. They encased him in a plaster cast from his waist to his ankles. And they drove wedges into the plaster to get his joints to move, so he could stand up. You have no idea what this man went through. Well, you're doing a little bit right now. So these are his braces. This is 1924. Those legs don't support anything. One thing you might want to look at is that you'll see that his ankles are always sort of perpendicular to his calf. That's because they were put there. Because if they weren't there, he couldn't stand up. He couldn't move it up. He couldn't move it down. It was frozen there. But that was the purpose of all the physical therapy he had. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about Missy. I would like to talk more about her, but this is a book, Catherine Smith's book. There's been so much written about Missy, which is baloney. She was the most, apologies to Eleanor, between 1920 and 1940, Missy was the most important woman in FDR's life. And she knew disability because at age 15, she was stricken with scarlet fever, and she had severe mitral valve heart disease. And she would go into atrial fibrillation now and then. They'd have to put her on digitalis. It would drive her wah-wah, and she'd be out for 3 or 4 weeks and then go back again. So she knew disability. So they bonded over that because she saw FDR. They had spent 3 winters, as you know, together on a houseboat with Missy and him, entertaining guests. I can't go much farther on this because I just simply don't have the time, but Missy was the best. And her grandniece is here. Why didn't she have children? Pregnancy for Missy was a death sentence. If she got pregnant, she couldn't carry a baby because her heart would have failed. There was a movie, I'm not going to go into it, but yes, she was a wonderful person, and she was FDR's everything until a clot broke off one of her valves in 1940 and paralyzed her right side and made her unable to speak. She dies in 1944 while FDR was on a ship between Hawaii and Alaska. Eleanor went to the funeral. It was celebrated by Joseph Cardinal Cushing, the future Cardinal Cushing. Oops, wrong button. Okay, so FDR gets polio in 1921, and he's flat on his back. He's paralyzed. So he's getting mail, right? So Louis Howe says to him, if they find out how sick you are, your political career is kaput. It's finished. They have been together since 1912, and interestingly, we'll talk about that in a minute. So this guy writes a letter, and Louis writes back, well, fortunately, he does have polio, but it's very mild, and he's going to have no permanent residual. The reason that Louis wrote the letter is because FDR was so paralyzed he couldn't hold the pen. He recovered that. So going back to, just quickly, 1912, they came together because when FDR is running for his second term as a New York State senator, he gets typhoid fever and he's flat on his back and he can't campaign. He remembered Louis. He says, you got to come up here. So Louis says, sure. Louis runs a campaign without a candidate. They win. And he writes a letter, a very famous letter to FDR in 1912 as the beloved and revered future president. That was the team. No Louis Howe, no FDR. So even the polio wasn't really admitted until 1985 when Hugh Gallagher, who was a polio a lot worse than FDR was, wrote this book. For the first time, telling the moving story of massive disability and the intense efforts to conceal it from the public. This photo was taken at Top Cottage by Margaret Suckley. It came out after he was born, after he was died. As all photos, there's not a single photo that came out during his life with them in a wheelchair or in any compromising position, or even a political cartoon, because if they tried to do it, they would A, seize the camera, and B, be banned from the White House press corps. Tough stuff. In fact, here's a little thing in 1936 from Stephen Early. They banned photographers of taking pictures of the president when it wasn't looking, because they didn't like one of the expressions on his face. So then, from this point on, you can only take a picture of him when he wants you to take it. So this photo came out about 15 years ago. FDR was in a wheelchair. That's his wheelchair. It was an armless wheelchair. It was basically a kitchen chair which he put wheels on. And he liked to do that because he would give therapy to himself by wheeling himself around. Harold said, he was running around on his elbows at this house trying to get back to walk again. So the interesting thing is this sailor on the far right, looking at him, he said, boy, this guy's in a wheelchair. I didn't know that. Nobody knew it. They would come to the White House in 1942 and 43, and I didn't know he was in a wheelchair. They thought he was just a man with a cane. To FDR's right is Louis Howe, the aforementioned Louis McHenry Howe. if you look real careful, you'll see a cigarette on his mouth. He was the definition of a chain smoker. 4 packs of Sweet Capital cigarettes a day. He dies of emphysema in 1936. To his right is FDR's beloved bodyguard, Gus Generich. Gus was the former New York State police officer, and he was the one that carried FDR around. And when Gus died unexpectedly, and when he was in when the FDR was in Argentina, and FDR was so taken aback by this. I mean, there's letters, number of letters, FDR handwritten, how much he mourned Gus. He has him lie in state in the White House. So there's a picture like this upstairs that I just looked at. So when FDR was, it took FDR 7 years to get back in the game. And we all know that Al Smith asked him to run for governor. So with the idea that he could carry New York State and Smith could win New York and win the election. Well, in 1928, the world was not ready for a Catholic president. And it wasn't too bad of a time with Hoover. And so FDR wins, and Hoover and Smith loses. So here he is talking to Smith, but the whole thing here is the braces. You remember seeing those braces, the picture? There they are, okay? It's attached to his shoes. But after he's president, they disappear. They start tailoring his pants long, painting the braces black. And here he is with James on his side, on James's arm, and to James's left, of course, is the woman who was responsible for us being in this house tonight, Sarah. And to his right is King George VI during the so-called hot dog lunch. But a man with a cane. If this is why that other photo is so remarkable, you look at it, you go, how is he standing? So FDR made one unfortunate mistake in his rehabilitation from polio. In 1924, Dr. Lovett dies, who was the leading polio specialist in the world, and he was brilliant, and he tried every method in the world, and he was looking around, and he bought Warm Springs, and he's rehabilitating people. His exams are as good as anybody's today with the muscles. He knew everything, but he made one little mistake. He thought, and he didn't know, nor did medical science, that sunlight ain't good for you. And in fact, we know now that one of the leading causes of melanoma is ultraviolet radiation from the sun. So FDR, as you look at this, loved the sun. All you can get, naked if you can be, just with a bathing suit if you can't do that. So he made a mistake, and what that turned out to be is melanoma. So here's some pictures of FDR early on. He's in his pince-nez on the left. This is during his tour as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. There's a scar on the right side of his eye. We know that's when he was in his parents' railroad car and a curtain rod fell and gashed his head open because he didn't want to tell his father about it, so he didn't fix it. And then in 1920, he's wearing a skimmer, and here he is looking during his vice presidential run, and you can see a tiny little freckle above his eye. Keep your eye on the first horizontal fold above his eye. Come on. All right, so he was diagnosed with melanoma in 1932. What did medical science know about melanoma? They knew that if you got it, if they didn't get it right away, you'd die. It would come back and get you. And I dare say there's people in the audience who had friends who had melanoma a while back, and now in 3 months they're gone because of the widely metastatic melanoma. That's the way this disease works. And they knew that. And FDR's physicians knew that. And the only way to treat cancer in those days was to cut it out or to burn it out. We had no other modalities to treat. Thanks to William Conrad Röntgen in 1895 and Marie Curie in 1898 for giving radiologists new toys to treat cancer. That was the first thing they did with it before they started looking at x-rays. So again, cut it out, burn it out. Not only that, cancerophobia. Cancer in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s was a stigma like HIV was in the 80s. If there was even a whisper of it, your political career is over. So they have a problem here. They got this thing above his eye. If they're going to do a wide excision, they got to take off his eyebrow and maybe even take out his eye in order to cure him. But they couldn't do that because the minute anybody has caught the scent of cancer, his career is over. So what they had to do is they had to try to do it in a way that nobody noticed. And you will remember, some of you, that President Cleveland had in 1893, during his second non-consecutive term, had a secret cancer operation. And it was done on a ship called the Oneida. They were sailing right here in Long Island Sound. This man, W.W. Keene, 2 other surgeons and a dentist, took out 5 teeth, a good portion of his upper jaw and his hard palate, and replaced it with a rubber prosthesis. 6 weeks later, he's back in Washington. Nobody knew the difference. He dies in 1908. And in 1918, this guy, W.W. Keene, writes an article for the Saturday Evening Post telling the true story 10 years afterwards. So, who was Keene in Roosevelt's life? He was 84 years old and in Buzzards Bay, and he was the first guy they called to see FDR with his polio. So he goes to Campobello, and he diagnoses a clot on the spinal cord. And he says, oh, it'll be all right. Then he goes home and thinks about it a little bit and says, maybe it's not all right. And he sends a bill for $3,000. I'm not making this up. So that's William Williams Keene. If you want to see the specimen, it's at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. All right, so history repeats itself. I'm going long, and I'm going to have to cut a bunch of things out. Let's talk about Dr. Hyder. The boat you see behind this group of gentlemen with FDR in the middle is called the Nourmahal. It was the world's most luxurious yacht, 263 feet, built in Kiel, Germany, over a year when Vincent Astor was there to supervise its building. FDR sailed on this yacht for the first time in January of 1943. Vincent was very much connected to FDR, and they became, after 1912, the best of friends, because you might have seen recently that John Jacob Astor's pocket watch sold for over £1 million. That was a possession of Vincent Astor. That was Vincent's father. Vincent, the executor, I'm not a lawyer, but the executor of John Jacob Astor's estate was his brother-in-law and his best friend. And who was that? Rosie Roosevelt, FDR's older brother, half-brother, who was 6 months older than Sarah. So who did the probate work for Astor to get his fortune and the family? FDR, and FDR, the firm of FDR and Marvin. So there are a number of people in this photo. I mean, there'll be books written about Vincent. I can't really go into it, but they were the best of friends. In fact, if FDR never had a younger brother, it was Vincent. They were together until FDR died. Very important man, very important relationship, not known but there will be books written about it. I think Paul Sparrow is in the process of writing a book about it. So the other person is Dr. Hyder. Who is Dr. Hyder? Dr. Hyder was born in Mobile, Alabama, and he trained down there. Then he wanted to come north to get a little experience in how to be a doctor. So he comes, and where does he go? He goes to the Memorial Hospital for the treatment of cancer and allied diseases. He does what's called an internship. Medical history was different at that time. The medical education was different at that time. This was an intense 6-month course of study. It's signed by James Ewing, who was Mr. Cancer for the first half of the 20th century, cover of Time magazine, Mr. Cancer. So he goes to this hospital. That building still stands. It's at 106th Street and Central Park West, and if you have 10 or 20 million bucks, you can buy an apartment there. The original structure was called the New York Cancer Hospital, the first cancer hospital in America. Problem was, nobody wanted to go to a cancer hospital. Nobody wanted to go near the place. Not only that, but it's a very imposing structure. It has turrets, because they thought cancer was infectious and it lived in the corners, so they made round wards. This is true. This is absolutely true. That's absolutely the truth. So they had to change the name 10 years later to the Memorial Hospital. And the Memorial, by the way, is the same M as Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, that this evolved into. So he trains, and what did he do? What did he do at Memorial Hospital? Fortunately, I learned about his name. I found his son, Bill, who's in Mobile today, probably listening. And he has his father's papers. Bingo. Next, come on. So, here we go. So what did he do? Whoop, no, we went too far. Here we go. This is from his training at Memorial Hospital. Turns out, he gives a talk in 1929, towards the end of his residency, for the head and neck service about an unusual case of frontal sinus involvement with cancer. Where's the frontal sinus? Right there. He's an expert in this stuff. He's trained in it. He goes across town to train for another year at New York Hospital. It's not the palace that it is right now, but it was a great, probably the Cornell Medical School, probably the best hospital in New York City. He trains under this guy in yellow, Eugene Hillhouse Poole, who was his preceptor. Poole, and that's a letter from in Hyder's hand, was his preceptor. And Poole introduces him to Vincent Astor, who coincidentally in that year had his appendix taken out at New York Hospital. So Poole introduces him to FDR, to Astor. Astor introduces FDR to Hyder, because Hyder was also treating other people that FDR knew very well. No time to go into it. So going up to the cruise. I know I'm running really late. I can only probably talk about the first part, and I'm going to skip to the last part. He invites Dr. Hyder to come on the cruise. For obvious reasons, this is a letter from Vincent to Dr. Hyder. For obvious reasons, on this particular trip, it will be absolutely essential to have a member of your particular profession aboard. And then he hand writes a P.S. Our preliminary try will have to be kept under the hat until our principal guest gives it out. So what happened to FDR on the yacht? This happened. Now there's a new scar in FDR's eyebrow, which was the portal for all of this stuff because they could hide it. So, famous photo: FDR and Hoover going to his inauguration. And now there's a long scar in his eyebrow. And now that little freckle is up to the first fold. I'm going to jump through this stuff. So if there's ever a smoking gun in the Roosevelt world, this is it. 1934, he's going on, fast forward 1 year, it's Easter 1934, and he's going on another cruise. And the purpose of the cruise is to burn out his melanoma. And the way they did it, this guy, Dr. McEwen, had invented a machine that he can deliver high voltage X-ray radiation outside of a hospital setting. Perfect. And he sends this is addressed to FDR at the White House. And he says, I have this new machine, which is treatments of with such apparatus will be the direct benefit to the cancer patient at my expense. You don't have to guess who the cancer patient was. So who was Dr. McEwen? He had written, this is the world's leading radiological journal. Those days, radiologists were not just diagnostic radiologists. They were the ones that did the nuclear medicine. So it was an all-encompassing specialty. So he writes this letter. Oh, look, this is a paper he wrote 2 years before. I've cured melanoma with radiation. Bingo. So I'm really running late, and I want to say something else in the end, so we'll move on. Come on, what did I do? Here we go. FDR, I don't have time to talk about this. He was the first. He wanted to be the first president to conduct a divine service on a naval ship because he was such a wonderful historian. That's why I love the guy. And he had pre-printed programs made up for the cruise, and this is the one that was signed to Dr. Hyder, who was on the ship, and saved his life from bleeding. Okay, I'm not going to talk about that. So let's look at this thing real quickly. 35. There's the scar. What they would do is they would have 3 or 4 days where they knew they could get away with it, nobody was looking, and they would go into his eyebrow and shell this thing out from the inside or try to burn it out. And that's what they did. Here is 35, and now just watch that little fold. Oh, by the way, this is a wonderful suture line from Ross McIntyre. He did a great job right here. That's a suture line. So anyway, forward. I caught him once. In 1937, there's an article in Life magazine about the sty and FDR eye and how he was avoiding cameras because of the sty. And Time magazine, which is the sister publication to Life, says, oh, it was his left eye. He's got a sty in his left eye. You want to see the sty? Here's the sty. Ouch. Right. Now look at this thing. It's above the first fold, right? Here we are now. Here's August of 38. He's still baking himself. Look at the tans on his neck. He's baking. He loves the sun. He's baking himself. Melanoma in place. Nobody knew it was bad, right? So here it is in 39. It's really ugly at this point. So Jan had the opportunity to ask Howard Brune about this. Because my friend Harry Goldsmith, who's 95 and going strong, was the first one to talk about the melanoma in 1979. So Jan, his interview's online. It's fascinating. So he asked him, what about that thing over? Oh, you mean that nut in Dartmouth? Talking about Dr. Goldsmith? No. He never had anything like that. That was a photographic error. You can't make it up. And we laugh about this all the time. This is the photographic error. So we go on. Now this happened 3 weeks ago. You know, I'm making new discoveries. This was the cover of my 2010 book because it had some thing going on over his eye. You'll see it's a proof photo from Hessler Studios, and if you blow it up, you'll see this. This little horizontal, the arrows on it, a little horizontal. I had thought for years this was a piece of retained suture material, but it wasn't. By the way, that little dot that was next to the right here is now been removed. You see the one, there used to be 2. Okay, so I thought, but then I looked at this photo 3 months later, that spot, right? This will blow your mind, blow my mind. This is a very famous photo taken at the groundbreaking for the Queens Midtown Tunnel. And it was taken through a telephoto lens. Well, you look now, where that little line was is now a dark circle with a white center. What is it? What did they do? So what is this? It's a radioactive seed. They were burning the tumor out because a stitch is not going to give you this in 3 months. They were trying to stop this thing from going north. And they were trying to burn it out. And nobody was supposed to know about it. And then it disappears. This is the Arsenal of Democracy speech, December 29, 1940. Fireside chat. All the celebrities are there. Clark Gable, Carol Lombard. And he gives the Arsenal of Democracy speech. The name, I figured out, came from this French guy, Monet, not important, but it's in Sam Rosenman's book. And if you haven't read Sam Rosenman's book, you should. It's Working with Roosevelt. It's the inside dope on FDR. It's unbiased. He knew the secrets, but he didn't talk about them. Sam Rosenman, his granddaughter, is now married to Merrick Garland. True. I'm not making this up. So I wanted to get some they're going to believe a neurologist about melanoma? Of course they're not. So my friend who's a very good dermatologist, you got to go see Bernie Ackerman. So Bernie has the Ackerman Institute of Dermatopathology. And And I go to see him, and he's interested. So I drag him up to Hyde Park, and we go through hundreds of photos, and we write a paper together. This is the last paper of Bernie's life, Ackerman and LeMahieu. And what did the editors of the Archives of Dermatology said? Looks a lot like melanoma to us. Come on. Okay, wait a minute. Okay. Sometimes you get clues from things you don't expect to get. In 1937, FDR left his burial plans. Okay. He wrote them down, put it in a safe next to him, handwritten. You can see him online. And in this, he says a couple of interesting things. I request there be only prayers by Reverend Endicott Peabody. Peabody was his schoolmaster at Groton, spiritual advisor at all the inaugurations and weddings, big guy in FDR's life. Okay, I want Dr. Peabody to do this. 2, that my body not be embalmed or hermetically sealed, and that the grave not be lined with brick, cement, or stones. In other words, he wanted to be a sand as soon as possible. So what's the problem with Peabody? He was 25 years older than FDR. Here's the photo from the 3rd inauguration. FDR is on the arm of Paul Watson. To his right is Reverend Peabody. FDR is 58. Peabody is 83. So if you write in 1937 that you want a guy that's 80 years old to preside at your funeral, you think he knew? Of course he knew. All right. He had prostate cancer. I can't talk about it. No time. Maybe another day. So it's in the book. Read the book. So here's one of his aliases, F. David Ralph. This is actually a side effect of the radiation he had for his prostate cancer. He bleeds down to a hemoglobin of 4.5. 4.5 is like, hopefully our hemoglobin is 12, at the least 13, 14, 15. This is 4.5. He had lost 8 pints of blood from his lower GI tract in 8 months. And, of course, what did Brune say about it? Oh, it was due to hemorrhoids. Folks, you don't bleed down to 4.5 from hemorrhoids, particularly when you have a full-time medical aide and a full-time valet lifting you on and off the toilet. Ain't gonna happen. So what happened? He needed to have a transfusion. How do we know? Because Eleanor told Anna about it. She knew it. She knows that the numbers are exactly the numbers that are on that slip. She saw the lab slips. We still have this era of lab slips. We have these lab slips. F. David Ralph, you name the alias. The ones that were actually on the FOIA document. And she writes, he has had 2 transfusions. Okay. Who did she write it to? Anna. Anna was one of the people who wrote the paper. All right, I have to jump ahead. Cardiovascular disease, his blood pressure was scary, 105, 106. This was done by George Fox, his medical aide, who actually did the same thing for Woodrow Wilson when he was sick. This is FDR, right? And, okay, wow, why didn't they do something about it? Because they didn't know to do anything about it. Hypertension wasn't, the first paper on malignant hypertension came out in 1929. And the leading authority in the country was Paul Dudley White. He writes in his textbook, it's good for you. It squeezes the blood. You have more pressure. It squeezes the blood into places it shouldn't be. That's what they thought. So, yeah, I mean, Brune knew something was not going on. Something wasn't kosher. But this is what medical science said. And if they wanted to do something about it, guess what? The first effective antihypertensive medication, hydralazine, didn't come out until 1951, 6 years after FDR died. All right, I'm going to jump. Oh boy, I got FDR's weight. He's 188 pounds. At death, he's 150 pounds, and you know what he looked like. And Churchill's physician saw him in September 1944 at Quebec. At this time, FDR was pumping along on 6 cylinders. By the time he got to Yalta, he had 4 cylinders left. He was fading. So he writes, Roosevelt's health impaired his judgment. This is 6 months before Yalta. And then he writes something very prophetic. And medical men do this. Men at this time of life do not go thin all of a sudden just for nothing. This is Churchill's physician. Of course he knew that FDR was dying of cancer. Neville Chamberlain was dying of cancer when he turned over the British government to Churchill. All right, I got to move ahead. The flat tummy, you know the Alta. This is one last thing I want to talk about. I'm a neurologist. This is my wheelhouse, okay? FDR, for the last year and a half of his life, was having Mitch McConnell moments. No, this is exactly what it was, Mitch McConnell moments. Everybody thinks that epilepsy is, you bite your tongue, you grovel on the floor, you pee yourself. No. Seizures can be the drop of a jaw, as it was for FDR, a staring spell. There are 25 independent reports of this behavior happening. So I wanted, again, confirm this, so I submitted an article to America's leading neurological journal. We call it the Green Journal. And I write a paper in 1911 about the epilepsy of Franklin Roosevelt. And they said, yeah, you're right. This is not a hard call for neurologists, trust me. So I'm going to go to the next one. Okay. Here's someone you know. Frances Perkins gave a wonderful oral history to Columbia University. And in it she says, when he fainted, as he did occasionally, not for many years, but for several years, that was all accentuated. It would be momentary. It would be very brief, and he'd be back again. Mitch McConnell moments, and he was having a lot of them. There's actually another interesting story about Mitch McConnell with FDR. Mitch McConnell is a polio, if you don't know it. He was treated at Warm Springs, if you don't know that either. So yes, he was having Mitch, so this is Frances Perkins, folks. She was very reliable. But there's 20 different reports. They didn't know what they were looking at because they weren't neurologists, but this is the behavior they saw. In fact, this senator is going to see FDR in 1945, and he goes in to see him, and FDR's in La La Land. He's staring out in space. He thinks the president's having a stroke in front of him. He goes to Paul Watson, the chief of staff, and he says, I think the president's having a stroke. What does Watson say? He'll come out of it. He always does. You can laugh, but that's exactly what happened. And this is in Doris's book in 1994, in which she got an interview from Howard Bruen. So you wonder why there's 73 years of medical cover-ups and a man only lived 63 years. Because it started in 1921 with Louis Howe, and it ended in 1994 when he started telling more stories to Doris Kearns Goodwin. And that's where this comes from. This comes from an economist, Elliot Janeway, but it's well referenced. Even Anna knew. 1948, she tells a friend that she thought they were what we called it TIAs. He was having bursting blood vessels in his brain. Well, these were the seizures. And this you'll notice that this document comes from the Herbert Hoover Library. You find very interesting stuff in Iowa because who was the chief archivist of the FDR library until 1963 and had control over everything that went into that library? Take a guess. Daisy Suckley. So this actually caught him in a seizure. This was in Life magazine. The speech in front of him is his fourth acceptance for his nomination. He's in the Ferdinand Magellan. There's Jimmy and his daughters-in-law. But the big problem was the guy on the left-hand corner in the front in profile. That's Dr. Bruen. He was the secret. And here he is in Life magazine. All the bells and buzzers went off at the FBI. They went all around the country trying to squelch the rumors that that the president's being treated by a cardiologist. Okay, the last speech, can't talk about that right now, but suffice to say, he gave the Alta speech. I get emotional when I say this, on March 1st, 1945. Coming back from the Alta, he has to sell the United Nations, his dream. He wanted to be what Woodrow Wilson wasn't. The United Nations was everything to FDR in the last years. He was a historian. That was his measure of greatness, to be better and do what Woodrow Wilson couldn't do. He was there and saw what happened to Wilson. So he wanted to have the United Nations. So he's selling this speech. Imagine this moment. He's selling this speech. He can't walk, so he comes out on his wheelchair. He gives this speech, and it's a terrible speech. It's fumbling. He has all kinds of fumpers and word repetitions and ad-libs. They're shocked. His speechwriters are shocked. Sam Rosenman, shocked. Robert Sherwood, shocked. Well, bottom line is I studied this speech. 31 pages. FDR gave this speech with a brain tumor. And he couldn't see the left margin of the page. Every error in that speech is because he had a left homonymous hemianopia. I'm a neurologist. I've been doing this for 50 years. This was a drop the mic moment when I figured this out at FDR. Those days you could go to the library and hold the original speech. Amazing. So, what did Brune say about it? Yeah, noticed on the radio that occasionally he was at a loss for words. No problem. He was fine. So, why did these people do it? Why did they go to the end of the world to cover up FDR's illnesses? It's very simple. Howard Brune, 2 weeks before FDR dies, sits down with Daisy Suckley in Warm Springs and says to her, this is from Daisy's diary, Miss Suckley, you realize that like all people who work with this man, I love him. If he told me to jump out of the window, I would do it without hesitation. Howard Brune jumped out of that window for 50 years. Thank you very much. Okay, ma'am, sir.
Thank you. I'm Michael Myers, New York Civil Rights Coalition.
Pleased to meet you, sir.
My question to you is, why did he not at least tell the vice president? And was the vice president truly did not know?
That's a very good question. So all this cover-up, they got away with it. They got away with it until 1944 when he started losing cylinders from the engine. And what was his schedule? He gave us an inaugural speech in 28 hours. He's on a plane to Yalta. He's there until March. He comes back, and Truman wasn't around, so he didn't tell Harry. It was an oversight on his part, shall we say? But that's the truth of what happened, and Harry found out from other people. So that's the reason that he didn't tell Harry. Yes, sir. Yes, gentleman in the back.
Yes, I read a book by Jim Bishop called FDR's Last Year. Did you ever read that book? And because I thought that book revealed
FDR's Last Year by Jim Bishop. Long book. He interviewed Anna. He interviewed Howard Brune, who was the technical advisor on the HBO special, the 2-part special that aired with Jason Robards as FDR. If you've never seen it, it's really great. Yep. But it's all a lie. It's
right.
The same
I'm about to ask
stuff.
you. Thank you.
It's the same stuff day by day, and you can find little pearls in there. But no. Yes, Bishop was taken in by Brune in the 70s, and up until Jan in 1990, and Doris Kearns Goodwin in 1994. Yes.
Yeah. Did you think that Stalin took advantage of FDR at that state?
I'm not a historian. I'm a doctor. Okay. I'm gonna try to stay in my lane. Stalin knew a lot of. It's funny because Stalin sent a letter to the White House after FDR died, and he thought that he'd been poisoned. FDR wanted the United Nations more than anything, and he knew that there was one person in his way with the United Nations, and that was Joe Stalin. So, did he compromise to some degree with Stalin to get what he wanted? He was hell-bent to get to San Francisco on April 25th. He was going to take a train, on a slow train. That's why he went to Warm Springs, to get the strength to go there. He gets on a train, he wants to get on a train, go there, give his speech in his wheelchair, go to the post office, and get the first copy of the stamp that he had designed for it. That was his dream. He missed by 13 days. But that was his measure of greatness. He was a great historian. He knew his place in history. He was our smartest president. 22,000 books in that man's library, most of them devoted to naval history. You can search the books. It's online at the Roosevelt Library. Yes, sir. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Man in the blue shirt. Gentlemen?
You mentioned many different medical conditions that he had, melanoma, I think you said a brain tumor, epilepsy. Are you suggesting that any one of those was really the cause of his death and that the death certificate is in fact either inaccurate or misleading? How do you approach that?
That's a really good question. There's a whole chapter in the book talking about this. He died of a brain tumor. We have Dr. Brune was there. We have his medical notes. We know exactly what happened. He died of a hemorrhage beginning in the right side of his brain. We know that for sure. And 6 weeks earlier, he'd given a speech and couldn't see on the left. So, of all tumors, which do not start in the nervous system, the one that does is melanoma, likes the brain the most. 25% of patients who have melanoma die of brain hemorrhage. So could it have been a hypertensive hemorrhage? Absolutely. You saw the blood pressure readings. They're scary. But my contention is we have evidence of 6 weeks before he gives this speech he can't see, and then he dies of a tumor coming from of a bleed emanating from the same spot in his head. We don't have an autopsy. We don't have tissue. People, what was it? This is a cover-up. Any evidence of this is going to be suppressed. Yes, a gentleman with glasses on.
Yeah. Was his malignant hypertension secondary to post-polio syndrome?
I don't think so. I've studied this with groups of physicians. My theory is, and this was pointed out to me by a very, very smart nephrologist, that the effect of radiation on the kidneys, called renal radiation disease, it begins with low-grade hypertension, then all of a sudden it spikes. This is the history. So, yes, that's probably where he got his hypertension, because it wasn't that bad before. It was, it was 80, 90, 105, but then it really went crazy in 44. So this is a valid question. I've answered it so many times. Yes, it could have been a hypertensive hemorrhage, surely. And would he have died within 4 years otherwise, as Frank Leahy said? Absolutely. But my contention, based on the evidence that I found, is that it was probably a melanoma. We'll never know. Yes, sir. Gentleman with the mask.
Did they listen to his wishes, no embalming of public grave?
Yeah, good question. It was in his safe. Eleanor went into his safe and she saw it was addressed to her son and she didn't open it. So that night she's on a plane with Ross McIntyre to Warm Springs, and the embalmers are there waiting. They're waiting for him. We have the embalmer's notes. 3 pages of handwritten notes. We know exactly what was going on. So, yeah, that's the story of that one. He was embalmed. And it was embalmed to the point where normally it's kind of gross and gory, but they do is they cut a blood vessel and they try to find a portal to put the fluid in, right? And they couldn't find one because his arteries were so blocked. But they did, and they embalmed him, and he's now rest forever, and I would never think about anything other than that, in peace, where the sundial stood in his mother's rose garden.